And next up, it's time to invite our panelists for our second panel discussion of the day. The title of this discussion is Resetting the Industry. How are we going to change the road transport paradigm so as to achieve net zero? Really delighted to be joined by Mel Lane, who is Chief Executive of New Motion, one of Europe's, I think actually Europe's largest electric vehicle charging network. Carlos Rodrigues, who is Managing Director for Renault Trucks UK and Ireland. And Kevin Chowings, who is Managing Director for the NatWest Future Mobility Group. So we have representatives from across the low carbon vehicle ecosystem to address these crucial questions. And yes, it's working. I can see everyone. Perfect. That's always an encouraging start. Excellent. So to get us underway, obviously, sorry, just one last thing. People do please feel free to put your questions in the chat function, and we'll try and make this as interactive as possible over the next 30 minutes or so. Let's start with a broad question for all the speakers. Do you support the government plans for a 2035 phase out of cars and vans powered by petrol and diesel, essentially the end of the internal combustion engine in those forms of transport? Do you think the deadline's realistic? Can we go faster, or is it unrealistic and we should be pushing it back? Mel, if we can maybe start with yourself. Oh, bit of a delay there. Maybe go to Kevin. Can we start with yourself?
Yeah, hopefully. Can you hear me, James?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Yeah.
Okay, good stuff. 2035, is it realistic? That's a very large dollar question. Yes, I think it is. I certainly think it's necessary. Probably support pulling that further in as previous speakers were talking about. The key for me, though, is the kind of certainty and the interoperability of technology, the use of data, sort of smart grid, smart charging, and the resilience of the energy system. There's a lot of work I think that needs to be done there. It's not my area of expertise, but I know Mel may have a view on that. But I certainly think it's something that should be explored to try and pull that in even further than 2035 to sort of catalyse the changes that need to be made here.
Absolutely. Mel, what's your take? Do you think 2035 is viable, and should we be, or can we do earlier? Oh, I think we might have some sound issues here. Mel, can you hear at all? Maybe Carlos, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you also. So we're just hopefully Mel can refresh and get herself back to hearing us. Carlos, I'll put the question to you.
Yeah, I think that 2035 is viable, and Shell's.
Oh, we can hear you now, Mel, if you go ahead.
I can hear you, yes.
Yeah,
can you hear me?
Yeah, we're all good. We're good now, I think, after a bit of a glitch there. Yeah, 2035 for yourself. Oh, Carlos, we'll go to you then. 2035, do you think that's realistic?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We are, from a Renault Truck perspective, we have already started promoting EV vans and trucks. We actually even launched last week our first right and drive heavy goods vehicle here in the UK, right and drive. So we are absolutely, on that trend. We have launched master ZE vehicles, electric vans 18 months ago. So we are on that journey, absolutely, and we are absolutely committed to be driving the carbon-free solution for transport.
Absolutely.
It will be gradual. So,
do you think? I mean, obviously, John Armit was talking about 2030. Do you think it can be done even sooner? I mean, that is 9 years away now. It seems it does seem hugely ambitious. But do you think we can make that quicker shift?
Well, I think this is a very complex equation. There is plenty of, bits and pieces that needs to come together for everyone to achieve that 2035 challenge. Can that be done quickly? Well, it's down to how much money you throw at it at one point. I mean, from a manufacturer perspective, we have strong challenges already ahead of us, from the EU perspective, achieving 15% and 30% CO2 reduction. We are committed to do that. Certainly for urban sector, last mile delivery, we have solutions now which are available. Realistically now, I think in the next 5 years, we have solutions to operate. We will have solutions to operate most of the urban applications, which is 30 to 40% of the what exists today. I think the long haul business would be more tricky, and this is when I was hearing this discussion around hydrogen and all this technology. Well, we will need a lot of money to be thrown at that to create infrastructure for us manufacturers to be able to provide the products, and this is where it's a complex equation. Everyone needs to chip in, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. Mel, great to have you back with us. Are you hearing us all okay now? Obviously, Mel is struggling to hear me. Okay, we'll move on, and hopefully the back office team can sort that out for us. Kevin, coming back to yourself, the LowCVP have kind of set this up as saying we need a reset of transport policy and the approach to decarbonisation of transport. I mean, do you concur? Do you think the conditions are right for a really quite fundamental reset of how we're thinking about these things at this point?
Reset, yeah, yes and no. I think a reset of certainty would be good, and a reset around pace would be good. The government has done a lot in terms of things like charging infrastructure fund or rapid charging funds. But I think more needs to be done along the way that Sir John was talking, which is to provide the right conditions for investment, both for companies and for finance providers, to be able to put capital to be deployed effectively and at pace. Without that certainty, it's really quite difficult to manage the timing risks, the technology risks, the policy risks, etc. So I think there needs to be a reset in the way that we work across this space. There needs to be a lot more national versus local versus national kind of policy coordination and rollout coordination. And there needs to be a lot more that can be done around public and private and how they work together to solve some of these infrastructure and investment challenges. So I think reset is, it almost implies that there's a degree of starting again a little bit. I think coronavirus COVID gives us an impetus and can show sort of glimpses of the future around a much more sort of carbon friendly environment from a pollution standpoint, and I think we need to leap on that. So I'd just like to see things move an awful lot faster with an awful lot more certainty. Yeah,
absolutely. It was interesting you mentioned the pace of the transition is key here. I suppose, Carlos, you guys have to deal with this in a very real sense in kind of the investment decisions you make. You've launched a electric truck, as I understand it, but then obviously you also have your legacy business. And how do you manage this sort of transition from one to the other, and getting the pace at which you're offering new products right, that the market's there for them?
Well, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do, I think, is bring solutions at pace when they make sense from a customer perspective and a cost perspective. Obviously, I mean, we were mentioning that earlier today. When we talk to customers about electromobility, the first thing they almost want to start with is what is the number at the bottom and corner. That's what they own because they run businesses, and all these solutions need to make sense for them. And what we see that on application with high mileage, high fuel consumption, all these electromobility solutions make sense and are effective now, and customers are making and jumping into that. Where I think it would be a bit more tricky is, well, of course, where the mileage of the fuel bill is not that big, while customers will possibly take a bit more time to enter that transition until it makes, as we say, a total cost of ownership sense, if I put it this way. And this is where we need maybe some policies to help making that transition, to help customers doing that transition towards this carbon-free road transport, which will come gradually. And I think what we have, my view on that is, we have solutions today. It's a big problem. Let's start to solve it step by step. And where I think we have today great impact, or could have a great impact, is urban and last mile delivery applications. Well, we have today solutions available on vans, on electric trucks, and we have today customers actually even today visiting the offices today and testing the vehicle. So there is a number of customers who want to jump ahead. And today we have early adopters, but those early adopters will drive that forward. And I think those companies who take that step, people will want to buy products from these companies because this will be recognized.
Yeah. Obviously, a huge technical debate on electrification of heavier goods vehicles. I mean, where do you... Obviously, some companies have really punted and said we can do really quite large trucks on electric, and others are saying, no, we need to look at hydrogen and other fuel sources to make it work. What's your hunch?
Well, we do trucks to transport load and not to transport batteries. That's a bit of a joke we have in our environment, So that's why I come back to step-by-step approach. On the urban and last mile delivery, the weight of the batteries still allows us today to provide good payload, so then customers can transport trucks in an effective way and very soon at a really good, I would say, competitive price for themselves, right? So that's why it makes sense. If you want to do a large truck, a semi-truck as we call them, well, of course, the battery technology is a challenge because it's very heavy. That's why hydrogen comes into play, and we come later because to do 1,000 kilometers, you'll do a massive, you need a technical massively big battery, and then come the payload issue. So this is why we need, for each application, we will have the right solution. And battery electric vehicles is the first step of electromobility. Hydrogen will be another step into electromobility, but they are not against each other. Every application will require its own right solution.
Cool. Excellent. Sorry, Kevin, just come to yourself with one more question. I believe we nearly have Mel back online, but I will come to her after one more question to yourself, and then hopefully we can hear from her down the phone line instead. Some people looking at discussion on road transport would ask, why is a bank involved and taking part in that discussion? I mean, what do you see as the role of finance and the banking sector in trying to unlock this position? Because it's true that you have a potentially very, very big role to play in making things move faster.
Well, we do. I mean, Sir John noted that, kind of the UK infrastructure, there's more finance provided by the private sector than there is by the public sector. I think NatWest has got some pretty clear and fairly bold kind of climate goals, including an additional £20 billion of funding for climate sustainable finance activities. And we bank 1 million business and commercial customers and 16 million personal customers. I think that confers an obligation on us to try and support those businesses to transition to a lower carbon future, notably here through transport, and also to make it easy for people to make decisions with the right information and access appropriate financing where that's possible, so that they can afford this transition. It's not going to be easy. Carlos is mentioning there some of the challenges that customers face. You look to the bottom right-hand side of the spreadsheet, and we need to play a part in trying to unlock the financing across the system, from individuals through to the smallest customers, helping them to transition their business models to absorb the mega trends that we're seeing, to play a part in kind of AV supply chains, to transition their fleets, all of which a bank like NatWest, I think, can play a pivotal role.
Absolutely. Mel, am I right in saying we can hear you? Oh, sorry, you can hear us now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Perfect. Excellent. Great to have you here at last after those. We were never going to get through the whole day, were we? I think everyone can agree on that without a couple of technical glitches, but good to have you with us. For those who don't know, maybe if you could just give a brief introduction to New Motion as an organisation, and then I put to you the question I was trying to earlier of whether or not you think the 2035 target for ending the sale of conventional cars and vans is feasible.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, and thank you for your patience. So New Motion, for those of you who don't know, is a Shell Group company. So many of you may know that Shell set itself an ambition to become a net zero emissions energy business by 2050 or sooner, if possible. And so as part of that journey, they bought New Motion in 2017. And now we work together on hardware, software, a variety of charging services for individuals and businesses as part of that drive to help enable as many people travel as many kilometres as possible powered by clean energy. And I would just say, I've only been in this industry for 3.5 months, But I have really been struck by how dynamic and fast-moving it is. As many of you other speakers have said, especially coming out of COVID, and clearly looking is such an important priority with the number of EVs growing exponentially. So I'm on a fast learning curve, but really excited to be part of the industry.
Absolutely. And on that question of 2035, do you think that's a feasible target? I mean, presumably running an electric vehicle charging network, you'd be very keen to see it happen as quickly as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So Shell is supportive of the 2035 target. I mean, certainly we think there is a lot that we need to do in partnership in order to make that a reality. So if you look at, for example, the number of charge points that we've just got in the UK at the moment, it's also to the level of infrastructure that we need to support that transition by 2030 means, you need to go from around 19,000 charge points today to around 500,000 by 2030. So we're fully supportive of it and recognise that we've got a big role to play in providing that support and infrastructure to make that target a reality.
Absolutely. Obviously, you mentioned there that Shell bought NewMotion and is the parent company. I mean, obviously, some critics have sort of argued that Shell's involvement in this space is an element of greenwash, given it's the bulk of its business is still in fossil fuels. What would be your sort of response to that accusation that does go around quite a lot? And then also, how will the company seek to manage that transition from its core business to what will be an entirely new operation in many ways?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. Yeah, I mean, delivering the solutions that the world needs to accelerate the energy transition, we think that it requires collaboration with all parts of it. It's going to require investment into infrastructure, the scale up of new supply chains, deployment of new technology, business models, customer propositions, I mean, you name it. And I think Shell has got very deep expertise in all of those areas within the energy ecosystem. And so we very much see ourselves as working in partnership with others to help accelerate that transition and leveraging the expertise that we've built over many decades to do that successfully. As I said before, I mean, our ambition is to be a net zero emission energy business by 2050, hopefully sooner. And in 2016, we set up a global new energies business to really try and accelerate the kind of the development of new technologies and new fuels that would really underpin that transition. So my business, NewMotion, is part of that drive, and we're not the only acquisition that Shell have made in this space. And I think the acquisitions just talk to the fact that Shell is really looking to accelerate the impact that it has by leveraging the expertise that has been built up in some of these kind of early stage companies over the last decade. The company is well prepared for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mel. I've got some questions from the audience coming in now. Carlos, there's one for you here that's quite interesting. Obviously, the projection is for electric vehicles that they can have cost parity with cars in hopefully the mid-2020s, or potentially even sooner. Do you have any sort of sense of when the total cost of ownership for larger trucks will have to deliver that parity? And do you think it can get there by 2035?
As I said, it depends which application you are talking about. If you look at the, let's say, the entry range from a weight perspective, 3.1 tons, the small vans, we are already at TCO parity in a number of applications today. Right, so that's not even a debate anymore. In the cities, in 5 years from now, even next year or the year after, will we want something as an electric van? Absolutely not. We need to drive that forward, absolutely. When it comes to heavy goods vehicles, the answer is a bit more complex, because what we need to understand is the range we need, the amount of power required for that vehicle, the size of the batteries, and also which application we are talking about. And if I take an example, if we look at the waste sector, for instance, And the first vehicle we have in the UK at the moment is a waste application. Well, on that sector, the consumption of fuel, of diesel, is quite high, about 75 liters per 100 kilometers. Well, in an application like that, the TCO priority will come far quicker than on a more, like, say, distribution, freight transport, because the fuel bill is not the same. But they will come. They will come because technology will improve, the range will improve, and I think in the urban environment and last mile delivery, far before 2030 or 2035, we will have cost parity.
Yeah, I mean, that's we're already seeing that, as you say, with fleets wanting to switch over to electric vehicles as quickly as they
absolutely.
can.
Absolutely. And I have to say, delivery. I have to say, we did, and I cannot say that's the name of the brand, but those who have followed that know which brand I'm talking, because it's linked to beer. I don't want to be driving people to drink beer, but even if in lockdown that has come up. But one of the big deals we have done, 23 D range electric vehicles this year actually signed with a customer in Switzerland, right? That brand believes that's the right thing to do. I have to say, the week after I went to buy in the supermarket, I wanted to buy that beer because that brand was doing the right thing. So absolutely, I think businesses who enter that journey of sustainability, they will drive business to them, because everyone is so focused now on sustainability and greenhouse gas and everything else. We should not underestimate. It's not the cost, it's the revenue opportunity coming by doing the right thing. Yeah. And the customers who are doing that today, I think, will see the payoff.
Excellent. A couple of other questions here. One from Stucky Chung at the SMMT. Do the panel think plug-in hybrid electric vehicles should be included in the end of sale target for 2035 or potentially sooner, as it may become? Yeah, I think it's a big coming debate, isn't it? I mean, are we talking about zero emission vehicles or low emission vehicles? And should plug-in hybrids be allowed to continue to be sold beyond 2035? Kevin, come to yourself first. Oh, I think you need to unmute, Kevin. There
we go. Yeah, I think plug-in hybrids have definitely got a part to play over the next few years, for sure. Certainly trying to help with people's sort of education and understanding and how to kind of transition to electric vehicles. As it relates to the 2035 question, I do think they should be included. You know, there's just a sort of illogical statement saying, well, I'll lug around 2 propulsive powers, right? It's sort of intuitively inefficient to be doing that. So I think after a period of time, they'll actually become an inhibitor, in my opinion, to net zero for road transport. So yeah, I do think that they should be included. But for now, I do think they're a very important kind of part of the equation as we transition.
It's very much a transition technology. Then they can't be the end goal.
Exactly.
Cool. Mel, if I can come to you, if you're still there via the phone, what's your take on the plug-in hybrid question?
Yeah, I would be in a similar position. So it's more of a transition. It's more of something that would support the transition to a lower carbon future, but not something that you want to be part of your end game. I mean, I think from our perspective, we should be driving towards fully electric vehicles, because to some of the points that were raised earlier, there's such a big infrastructure change that needs to happen, and accelerating that means facing into a different kind of mobility and a different kind of infrastructure. And so the kind of the hybrid keeps you kind of balanced across both spaces. So I think ultimately it's good for the transition, but I think we're going to need to move to the fully electric space as we evolve that infrastructure.
Absolutely. On a related note, we've got a question here from Oroskanda Vipari, which I really like. He mentions the idea of what does the panel feel about cold turkey regulation as opposed to incremental targets. So the idea, I suppose, of governments being a lot bolder in just saying, that's banned or that has to stop. at relatively short notice. The argument being that lockdown seems to have shown that society can respond and adapt behaviour quite drastically when it feels that it needs to. Are businesses prepared for the potential for cold turkey policy interventions, and would they potentially even be supportive of such drastic moves? Carlos, I'll come to you next. Did you like the idea of going cold turkey to get to electric, or do you think we need a more incremental approach?
I think I would rather go for an incremental approach and a well-targeted policy. I think there is my business is to deliver capital equipment, which requires massive investments from our customers. I think if you go for a cold turkey, the chances are you can shut down a lot of businesses, because how do you make that work? So I think I would rather go for a clear transition more than a year. I would echo one of the surgeon comments, a long-term commitment. That's what we need to hear. If we have that visibility, I think for OEMs as Renault Trucks and customers, they will know where they should put the money, and then they'll be probably more quicker actually to do that move. I think now what we need is clarity, which technology, which infrastructure, and then I think people will follow. We probably need a quick solution and a quick decision on what is the right strategy.
Excellent, thank you very much. Really interesting question from Kit Harbottle. He says there's a lot of jargon in the chat today, which inevitably seems to happen when experts in an area get together. What efforts are being made by whom to provide clear and easy to find information to ordinary people who are thinking about their next car, and the consumers who are actually going to determine the pace at which this transition happens? I suppose Kevin and Mel, you both work in what are essentially consumer-facing organisations. How do you get that information across and reassure people that this technology is good to go and attractive? Kevin, come to yourself first.
That's pretty tricky. In the bank, in finance, there's been a lot over the last decade or so that has occurred that has forced our industry to face into the kind of transparency of our products, the benefits of them, and the challenges that they may face, such that people are able to buy with confidence. And that is definitely needed here. As I was preparing for this, one of the kind of keynote point that I made was around education. I think OLEV does a good job. But the whole thing needs to go up a notch, frankly, so that people have got the information in their hands. Things like labeling needs to be better. Things like just the journeys that people go through in terms of buying, in terms of charging. There is too much variability, if I'm honest. And whilst now, to some degree, that's kind of fine, whilst you're finding your way and trying to find the best business models and kind of commercial arrangements that work. There comes a point where we need to be much more sort of prescriptive about what good looks like, and enable kind of consistent journeys, consistent information, and then people can make good decisions at the right time.
Yeah, absolutely. Mel, would you agree that there needs to be an improvement on this front?
I think there needs to be an improvement on a number of fronts in order to help consumers make the choice to move to EV. If you look at it at the moment from a consumer's perspective, it can be a bit of a minefield. And even for those people who have already got an EV, we do a survey, a largest survey of EV drivers across Europe. 43% of them said that they don't know what they're going to pay when they turn up to a public charge session. Most people with an EV vehicle in the UK need more than 3 cars to ensure that they've got good accessibility across the network. So I think there are a whole range of things that we need to do to simplify. I think some of it is around jargon, as you said before, around information, real clarity. And we're doing that through not just B2C channels, so consumer channels, but also through our partners. So we work very closely with OEMs, we work very closely with lease companies to really try and make sure that the end driver has got the information that they need. But I think it's that complexity steps across a number of different spaces within the industry, and I think there's a number of things we need to work together on to simplify if we're really going to get to that tipping point.
How close are we to getting some of that simplification? I test drove an electric car. I was lucky enough to be given one for a week last autumn. I don't have one currently, but I was given one for a week, and in that week I ended up with, I think, 6 different apps on my phone. It was without a shadow of a doubt, it was the best car I've ever driven. I absolutely loved driving it, but the charging experience was, for someone coming to it for the first time, frustrating without a shadow of a doubt. I mean, how close do you think we are to kind of getting that issue solved?
Yeah, so I can't give you a time frame around when I think that would be solved, but I think that is something that a lot of us are pushing very hard on to drive interoperability, to drive price transparency, so that as a consumer, as a driver, your experience is so much easier. You can access the charge points that you want, that are closest to you, without having to have 6 apps or 5 cards or whatever it might be. And to take away that range anxiety, which we talked about earlier, is a big blocker for people, or the concern that people have when they're moving into the EV space. So I'm not sure how fast it's going to happen, but I think there's a lot of us driving towards that kind of environment where we can make this a lot simpler for drivers.
Absolutely. One last question then to wrap up, as I'm mindful of time, but we've got a fascinating question from Mike Sutton, who asked, what role should life cycle analysis play in this discussion about the transition that we're making? And then Professor Gillian Anable adds that there's no such thing as a zero emission vehicle, which is of course true. There's zero emission at tailpipe, but not zero emission in the construction and the like. Does the panel sort of accept that premise, and that maybe there is a case for looking at slightly different models that involve less transport or shared transport or other and more efficient ways of doing this, that means that those embedded emissions are kept as low as possible as well? Carlos, you're nodding there. Maybe you take first punt.
Yeah, I think we see, in the transport industry, in the UK actually, it's probably, if you look around in the motorway, the industry has done great improvements. One thing that you see in the motorway is these double-deckers trailers. And obviously, what the industry has done there is, by having an optimized trailer, you transport more, so you reduce your ton per kilometer effectively. And I think we see now in certain areas cross-sharing platforms coming up, which they will allow payload to be optimized and to have more load per vehicle, which is also a way to improve and reduce carbon per ton. And definitely, maybe in the transport industry, will we have a hubber in one day doing that across all the transporters? I don't know, but these are all things that we will, of course, look at. But I think we will be adapting to what the business requires. The important thing is we do have today electric vehicles, which are zero tailpipe emissions, absolutely, and they, on the urban environment and last mile delivery, provide a clear improvement on CO2 emissions. And in the UK today, 40 to 50% of the electricity is carbon-free. It will be close to 100% according to National Grid and their website in 2025. That is a great improvement. And that is something we can work on now. So I think I come back to my initial starting point is this is a complex issue, and we will not solve a complex issue by waiting for a full-scale solution. Let's solve it bit by bit and piece by piece, and that's what we are trying to do.
Absolutely. Kevin, banks obviously look at a lot about how markets and consumer habits will change. Do you see the shared car and the shared transport and transport as a service model gaining traction, or are we too wedded to buying our own new and second-hand cars every few years?
I do see it gaining traction. We've looked at some businesses, we've looked at some business models that play fair and square in that environment. My view is that we have to take kind of the current kind of COVID situation a little bit to one side in what I'm about to say. But for sure, I think sharing, whether that's sharing rides, sharing vehicles, a shift to usership over ownership to drive kind of asset utilization up. I can see that happening for sure. And then, the increase in kind of data availability and the ability to manipulate that and put it in people's fingertips enables them to make smarter choices to combine sort of the active transport component, a ride share, e-scooter, e-bike, and public transport, all essentially in one kind of model. I think that,
and maybe automated transport one day as well. That's obviously
I'll leave that for next year's conference. I think more the AV side. But you can see the investments going in there, certainly in the West Midlands region. So I think it will play the sort of mobility as a service, transport as a service, battery as a service. I think all of those parts will increasingly come together. And I think one of the goals, certainly that we need to look at, is just to reduce miles travelled and the impact of those miles travelled or number of vehicles on the road, travelling those miles. So I think that they'll all play a part. But there's quite a lot of sort of, like I said before, sort of national and local planning that needs to come together to enable these business models to thrive. But a bank plays an integral part in this. NatWest has got a huge sort of entrepreneurship academy at play, and 25% of those spaces are sort of dedicated to customers with a sustainability sort of agenda and angle right now. And I think mobility as a service plays into that, and we'll hopefully see an increase. But we do need to get over, right now, some of the challenges of sharing, some of the challenges of public transport capacity, and that won't be easy. And it'll take a number of months for us to understand some of the future consumer patterns around buying behaviour and travel behaviour.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, Mel, I come to yourself with that same question on, how concerned should we be about the embedded carbon of all these new electric vehicles we're going to buy, and do you see other models evolving to help tackle that?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things. Certainly, I think we've all said there are multiple pathways to achieving low carbon, zero carbon transport. So that's going to be not just about EVs, it's also going to be about ride sharing, it's going to be about different forms of public transport. That I think they're all going to play into the mix. I think on the piece around embedded carbon, so that's very true. And I think what we're seeing though is, and this is why it needs to be a partnership, right? It's not just one part of the value chain or one part of the ecosystem. And so companies are looking at their scope 1 and scope 2 emissions as well. So the carbon associated with the production of their goods and also the transport of their goods. And certainly in Shell, we're working on both scope 1, scope 2, and also working on scope 3 emissions. And we're partnering with lots of other organisations who are going through that same journey and looking to kind of work deeply within their supply chains, their production models, how to get that embedded, that carbon footprint down within, the manufacturing processes, the distribution processes. So I don't think this is just something that's going to sit within the mobility industry in terms of the burning of the fuel. I think we're looking at this across the whole ecosystem as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mel. Thanks to the whole panel for their insights, to Kevin, to Carlos, and to Mel for joining us there. And thanks also to all of you for your questions. I hope we managed to get through as many of them as possible.